Okay, today is November 27th, 2021, and on November 27th, but different year, of course, Jacopo Sansovino. Today I checked his the correct pronunciation, and apparently it's Jacopo Sansovino, died. So let's read a few things about him. So he died in 1570, and I think Michelangelo, just as a as a reference, died about 6 years earlier in 1564, if I remember correctly. So he was a contemporary of the great Buonarroti, Michelangelo, and others, of course. So this was the man who was very, very appreciated during his lifetime, especially during his years in Venice. He lived a long life, and he was the chief architect in Venice for many years. So Jacopo d'Antonio Sansovino, born in July 1486 and died on November 27, 1570, was an Italian sculptor and architect best known for his works around the Piazza San Marco in Venice. These are crucial works in the history of Venetian Renaissance architecture. Andrea Palladio, in the preface, I forgot how to pronounce, to his Quattro Libri, was of the opinion that Sansovino's Bibliotheca Marciana in Piazza San Marco was the best building erected since antiquity. Giorgio Vasari uniquely printed his Vita of Sansovino separately. So let's contemplate again what Andrea Palladio said. I mean, this was a building built, in the 16th century, Bibliotheca Marciana, and Palladio said that it was the best building built since antiquity. I don't know if Palladio knew about the great Gothic cathedral and about the many important buildings built also before the Gothic times, but still, this is a very, very strong statement. The best building built since antiquity, and it was built by Jacopo Sansovino. He was born in Florence. Jacopo Sansovino was born in Florence and apprenticed with Andrea Sansovino, whose name he subsequently adopted, changing his name from Jacopo Tati. This is also interesting because at that time, apparently there was this close relationship between, master and apprentice. And I know of other cases where the apprentice took the name of the admired tutor or mentor. It was this continuity that is a phenomenon completely absent today. Today, no one would think of taking the name of his or her professor, but at that time it was done. And again, Jacopo Sansovino took the name of Andrea Sansovino, the family name, because he worked with him, and I imagine he admired him. Imagine Brâncuș taking the name of Rodin, Constantin Rodin. No way. Anyway, in Rome, but on the other hand, Brâncuș, I'm sure he admired Rodin, but at one point he refused to work with him or for him, because in modernity, at least this was the conception of Brâncuș, in the shadow of the big trees, grass does not grow. But obviously, in the 16th century, Sansovino had a different, Jacopo Sansovino had a different conception, and he generally in so-called older times or traditional times, there was no such conception that that in the shadow of the big trees grass does not grow. Quite the opposite. It was the belief that in the proximity of the so-called big trees, one flourishes. But we are not talking about modernity here. So back to Jacopo Sansovino. In Rome, he went to Rome after Florence, and he attracted the notice of Bramante and Raphael and made a wax model of the Deposition of Christ for Perugino to use, which is beautiful. And I will end this presentation with an image of it. So Sansovino returned to Florence in 1511, where he received commissions for marble sculptures of St. James for the Duomo and the Bacchus, now in the Bargello. His proposals for sculpture to adorn the facade of the church of San Lorenzo, however, were rejected by Michelangelo, who was in charge of the scheme, to whom he wrote a bitter letter of protest in 1518. Now, as you know, Basilica San Lorenzo, the building was built by Brunelleschi, but the facade was never finalized, was never finished. And it is today just as it was at the time when it was built. Michelangelo, yes, made a proposal for that facade, and it didn't become a reality. So it seems Jacopo Sansovino also proposed sculptures for that facade, but Michelangelo rejected them. Apparently, Michelangelo didn't like Sansovino at all. I read some other things about the very tensioned, relation. In the period of 1510, 1517, he shared the studio with the painter Andrea del Sarto, with whom he shared models. Like all 16th century Italian architects, Sansovino devoted considerable energy to elaborate but temporary structures related to courtly ceremonies and festivities. Even, I mean, some very important artists and architects didn't feel diminished by contributing to this, in a way, to stage design, and even designed, costumes and so on. The triumphal entry of Pope Leo X into Florence in 1515 was a high point of the genre. He subsequently returned to Rome, where he stayed for 9 years, leaving for Venice in the year of the sack of Rome. In Venice, he built rather a large number of buildings, palaces and churches, but his masterpiece is the Library of St. Mark's, the Bibliotheca Marciana, one of Venice's most richly decorated Renaissance structures, which stands in front of the Doge's Palace across the Piazzetta. Construction spanned 50 years and cost over 30,000 ducats. On Wikipedia, you can even find out about the salary Jacopo Sansovino received. At first, I think 80 ducats, and then in 1 year, 180 ducats, and so on. He was very appreciated, and he lived right near the Campanile in Piazza San Marco, in an apartment that was offered to him by the authorities of Venice, and as a sign of appreciation for what he meant for Venice. In it, he successfully made the architectural language of classicism. I'm talking about Bibliotheca Marciana, traditionally associated with severity and restraint, palatable to the Venetians with their love of surface decoration. This paved the way for the graceful architecture of Andrea Palladio. Here, I also want to say what I read, that apparently Sansovino was the best Renaissance architect who was able to combine architecture and sculpture in a very, organic and meaningful and convincing way. So he's actually buried in the Basilica in San Marco, and he's considered one of the forces in the culture of this magnificent city. So now let's look at his buildings, but I will show first some pictures of him, and then a few drawings, and then we'll look at the buildings. Now, this is an engraving, a portrait of Sansovino, but done later. Usually these engravers idealized, the appearance of those they depict. Anyway, this is a portrait. I don't know who painted it, but it's probably a rather accurate visual description, so to speak, of Jacopo Sansovino. Yeah, some drawings. I only found a few images. Unfortunately, the resolution is not great. This one is a little bit better. And of course, all these Renaissance artists drew magnificently. You know, they didn't have Photoshop, they didn't have cameras. So they relied on the ability of their hand. Yes, some of them drew in a way that probably today not many would even attempt to draw. Anyway, yeah. Now let's see his buildings. Jacopo Sansovino and the Romanization of Venetian architecture. This is an interesting subject. He brought apparently to Venice, let's recall, he was born actually in Florence. Then he went to Rome and he spent a number of years there. He brought to Venice what here is called the Romanization of Venetian architecture, a sense of, classicism in a way, of order, of even reticence, and a less abundant, or even we could say Byzantine understanding of what ornamentation might mean. But still, Sansovino honored the city where he spent so many years and where he died you could say he worked for the Romanization of Venetian architecture, but in a way he also brought to what is called Roman architecture a different sensitivity or sensibility, and this is shown in his ability to unite architecture and sculpture. And for example, Bibliotheca Marciana is a building which attracted the applauses of Andrea Palladio exactly because it is decorated and because ornamentation takes part in the building. It is a force that adds to the building something that perhaps Roman architecture had less. It's that gentle Venetian breeze, so to speak. Now let's look at Ca de Dio. This is not ornamented. It's a building that looks today like this. I don't know how it looked like during his time. It's a building with a social function. There were these programs where there was a church or a chapel, a hospice, quarters for helping the poor in some form. So there were hybrid programs, and this one looks like such an architectural program. You would say, almost with a socialist agenda, if I am to describe it in maybe brutally, modern ways. But I'm glad that an architect of the stature of Jacopo Sansovino allocated time and talent and resources of work to work for those who were less privileged. This used to be a hospice. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Ca di Dio, a former hospice, is Venice's newest 5-star hotel. You can see, in fact, the Campanile of San Marco through the window of this room in this building built by Jacopo Sansovino, but for a very different program. Anyway, so now Palazzo Dolphin Manin. These palazzos, from what I understood, they many of the buildings that face the canals of Venice, they are remarkable for their main elevation, but actually, from what I understood, their plans are almost identical. They don't differ architecturally very much, and the side elevations are not glorious. It's just the front elevation, which in a way is kind of an architectural stage design. Anyway, he did this and he did others. You see already, you can see a little bit here, maybe the side elevation is not so distant aesthetically from the front, but in most of the building, you can see here also, it's a different story. But this is happening even now in New York City. Many buildings are like this, where the front elevation is, you know, shows an aesthetic concern, and then the side elevation is rather pedestrian or banal. Okay, sorry about this picture. I don't know what happened. Some pictures from the inside. The inside, of course, has furniture. Who knows from what time? Anyway, Venice. But Venice is glorious. Doesn't matter almost how the buildings individual are. Yet there are riches, of course, inside these buildings, and you can see here, you know, it is a room that has, you know, its own rhetorics. Now, Palazzo Corner della Ca Grande, similar to the one we just saw. He was an architect who built a lot in Venice, and you know, being the chief architect of Venice, unlike now apparently in Romania, where the chief architect is not necessarily obliged to be an architect, it was not the same in Venice at that time. Anyway, and you see, yes, there is some kind of austerity of the facade that came perhaps via Rome. So if this is the Romanization of Venetian architecture, maybe it is. But even here, there are certain details that point in the direction of ornamentation, and an ornamentation which softens, you know, the before mentioned Roman austerity. If he was able to marry Venice with Rome aesthetically, this in itself is a significant achievement. Why he irritated Michelangelo, I do not know. But artists are, you know, idiosyncratic. You know, we don't know. You know, artists are not objective. You know, they respond to someone in subjective terms, and I guess that's how Michelangelo responded to Sansovino, Jacopo Sansovino. This is the plan. As I said, many of these buildings have very similar plans, and you know, the only major difference, but even this one is not so major, or you know, very, very distinctive, is this main elevation. San Francesco della Vigna, this is a church, and rather, in my opinion, rather impressive little church. It's not a big church, but, and I don't even know exactly where it is in Venice. I probably passed by it, and I, without knowing, was built by Jacopo Sansovino. This one also, I would say, has elements of what might be called the Romanization of Venice. I don't know if he did the sculptures here or not. He built this church. Again, how is it called? The San Francesco della Vigna. The interior almost makes me think at least a little of Brunelleschi. This is indeed a Renaissance that is somehow not Venetian. I look at these arches, and something of Brunelleschi here, but Brunelleschi, of course, from Florence, not from Rome. So maybe there were influences, not just, you know, coming from Rome towards Venice, but also having to do with the biography of Sansovino and other influences. All in all, I think it's an interesting church, and I regret I was not aware of it when I was in Venice a few times. Anyway, we are going to see some other things by Sansovino. Jacopo Sansovino. We remember there was another Sansovino, Andrea Sansovino, who was the, the master of Jacopo, or the mentor. Now, Fabbriche Nuove di Rialto is, I forgot the function of this building, was certainly not sacred. Is this building here with this row of arches. Maybe some kind of manufacturing. I mean, considering the word fabriche, I'm thinking of something having to do with some kind of manufacturing. I don't know. Anyway, it's I kind of like these buildings which are neither sacred nor having to do with palazzos, but building connected with work. And thus, there is a certain modernity here that I admire, considering that this is a 16th century building. I mean, this man built in San Marco, not just Bibliotheca Marciana, he also built a church, which Napoleon destroyed, and we are going to see it. So this man had commissions in the very center of Venice, and yet he also built such buildings, and I admire him for this. I don't know why. I mean, who knows? Maybe I have hallucinations. But when I look at some of the buildings by Jacopo Sansovino, somehow I see him. I mean, I see him as in the painting that I just showed at the beginning of the presentation. I somehow see him, yes, his physiognomy, his face into the buildings. Of course, it is not there, but this is strange. Something somehow similar happened to me when I was reading Crime and Ornament by Adolf Loos. And I had the feeling that I was hearing his voice. Of course, I never heard the voice of Adolf Loos. But when I was reading the text, I had the feeling that I was hearing a voice, his voice, because he wrote the text. In this case, I see somehow the face of Sansovino in his paintings. I'm not very sure I did the right thing now confessing about this peculiarity I have. This only happened to me actually with Adolf Loos and Jacopo Sansovino. I perhaps should reflect on this. There might be some meaning in this. Maybe I have some certain things in common if I am allowed to say something so in a way maybe without enough modesty with Sansovino or with Adolf Loos. I don't know. Anyway, let's look again at this building. Now we look at Zecca di Venezia, another palazzo. These palazzos, I cannot relate to them very well because they are palazzos. But you see, it's very close to the Campanile of San Marco. So this is the building. He designed several like this. I'm not very impressed by them. Anyway, it's not for me to be impressed by them. It is by Jacopo Sansovino, and this is enough. Now, it might be that actually Bibliotheca Marciana, just around the corner, or maybe even this part of the building is Bibliotheca Marciana. Somehow the architecture makes me think of it. It's possible. We are going to see that building, the best building built after antiquity, in the opinion of Andrea Palladio. As we read, Scuola Nove della Misericordia. I like these buildings, which are, somehow without finishes, and they just have the right proportions, and there is a calm monumentality. I like such buildings. And indeed, you could say here that it is some kind of Romanization of Venetian architecture. An incredible room, of course. I mean, its scale and it's splendid. I'm sure Venetians know how to do it, to rent it to Americans or now Chinese. I like even the new intervention here, you know, with the curtain. Venice doesn't have a lot of modern interventions, and I understand on one hand. On the other hand, I kind of regret. In a few days, it will be a chance to pay homage to Marinetti, to the, you know, controversial in a way poet of futurism, and he wrote a manifesto against Venice. Very violent manifesto where he asked Venice to wake up from its dream, which only encourages superficial tourism. And there are, I would say, positive aspects in that manifesto written by Marinetti. That's why when I see modern interventions within the fabric, the urban fabric of Venice, it's you know, I understand it's not easy to do so, to build in this way, but on the other hand, in the name of life, in the name of the time we live in, perhaps is necessary. I myself launched a competition when it was Giovanni Bellini's, I don't know which birthday. I launched a competition to build an exhibition space, gallery in front of the church where he is buried. And I received some interesting works, all very, you know, contemporary, so to speak. Anyway, this is a good work by Jacopo Sansovino. I wish I had the chance to, you know, at least rent or live for a while in such a room and paint or dream or write poems on the floor or something. Anyway, San Zulian on the Merceria is another church by Jacopo Sansovino. This one a little more idiosyncratic if we compare its facade with the previous church that we saw kind of, you know, in a similar urban context, rather narrow and so on. It's a whimsical facade, this one, almost with touches of or insinuations of Baroque somehow. Now, I don't know if the interior was done by him or was done later, but here we see certainly something that would be considered against the Romanization of Venetian architecture, and is the influence coming from the East, you know, from Byzantium, from, the connections, the cultural connections between Venice and the East were strong and significant. Now, Palazzo Ducale, Scala d'Oro, he just built in Palazzo Ducale this staircase or stair, and it is triumphalist and adorned with gold. Now we arrive at his major work, his most important work in the opinion of Andrea Palladio, and we should trust Andrea Palladio, shouldn't we? Bibliotheca Marciana, a building which, again, Andrea Palladio considered the best building built after antiquity, meaning, you know, after 100, 500 years or so. Is not a little thing. This is an image that was not generated by Jacopo Sansovino, was, I guess, an engraving done later. But this is the building. And I asked myself, why did Palladio, please be kind and turn off the microphone. There is a noise in the background. Thank you. Why did Palladio value so much this building? Because, you know, Palladio was a very knowledgeable man. He spent time in Rome measuring, ruins and temples and all kinds of structures in the Roman Forum. He knew about architecture a lot, and we are talking about Andrea Palladio. obviously he loved this building if he thought that this is the best building built after antiquity. And the antiquity happened about 1,000 to 500 years earlier. I am asking you and I am asking myself, what did Palladio value in this building? Is it its rhythmicity, its order? Is it its geometry? Is it its ornamentation? What is it? Or perhaps the balance between structure and ornament, between the masculine principle, if we are to associate it with structure, and the feminine principle, if we are to associate it with ornamentation. The truth is, it's not easy to bring them together in a perfect harmony. Structure and ornament. We today, at least where we are, we totally neglect ornament, but in my opinion, it's a great loss. Can you imagine this building without the ornamentation? Can you imagine the buildings of Palladio without ornamentation? Yes, ornamentation can be discreet, yet it adds something if it is done sensitively to the building. And this is how it is done, I would say, in this building. So this is the building, Bibliotheca Marciana. He also designed this building here, the base of the campanile. I'm talking about Sansovino, but it was destroyed. I forgot in what circumstances. It was rebuilt, but some of the existing bas reliefs or sculptures still belong to Sansovino. This was rebuilt, but initially it was designed and built by Jacopo Sansovino. But it was this building, which is, of course, positioned, in a very important way in this, perhaps the most important square in the world, Piazza San Marco. This was built by Jacopo Sansovino, and this, again, Andrea Palladio valued so much. Again, can we conceive of this building without these sculptures and without this ornamentation here? I don't think so. Because if we remove them, we get a building that certainly cannot be considered the best building ever built after the antiquity. Now, why is it that today we don't even think of employing sculptures in our buildings? Why? I'm not talking necessarily about figurative sculptures, even abstract sculptures. Why is it that we do not bring them into the building? We bring them sometimes in front of buildings, like Alexander Calder in the proximity of the buildings by Miss Van der Rohe in Chicago. But they are not brought into a conjunction. They are not brought and thought together, like in this case, and like in many other cases in past architecture. Why is it so? Even Walter Gropius in his manifesto stressed the importance of having the sculptor, the painter, and the architect work together. Why is it that today we don't work together? Why? On the other hand, why is it that we don't have more architects who are also sculptors, like Jacopo Sansovino? Is it because Homo economicus won the battle with everyone else? And today we have architects who are businessmen, we have architects who are merchants, we have architects who are anything but artists. Why? Even John Ruskin said for an architect to be good, he must be either a painter or a sculptor. Now, maybe his conception is a little bit restrictive, but I think there is some truth there. It is not an accident that Bernini was a good architect because he was also an excellent sculptor. It's the same with Michelangelo, who was essentially a sculptor. He was also an excellent architect. Where are the sculptors today who practice architecture? Where? I don't think the essence of architecture changed, the spirit of architecture. Sansovino was mainly a sculptor, but he became the chief architect of Venice. Why is it that the chief architect in a Romanian city or some other city in the world today is not a sculptor? and a sculptor who also builds. Why? We should reflect on these issues because this shows the very low level of artistic sensibility that our time has. It doesn't even cross the mind of a city hall or the administration of a city to hire a sculptor as its chief architect. It doesn't, in fact, it doesn't qualify so-called legally. Well, it was different thanks to Venice at that time. They hired Sansovino, and yes, Venice impresses with its beauty. Well, this is the result of hiring a sculptor in the position of being the chief architect of the city. But if we hire a lawyer or an accountant to be the chief architect of the city, please do not expect a lot of beauty, unless it is, of course, accidental. I don't think these things are difficult to comprehend. And yet, we do not change. Nor are we bringing back to buildings sculptors and sculptures. And again, I am forced to ask why. Now, it's very possible that Andrea Palladio didn't take into consideration some of the other great buildings built until his time. It's possible. Still, I don't think he was wrong or totally wrong when he named this building the best built after antiquity. He was obviously admiring this organic balance between as I said, structure and ornament in this building. Maybe again uniting the opposites, somehow Rome and Venice. Bibliotheca Marciana in Venice, Jacopo Sansovino. Now, look at the ceiling of this room. Now, I understand it's a special room in a special urban context, in a special city. Yes, it is. But let's compare the level of artistry here for all to see with the level of artistry in our buildings. We don't even look up towards the ceilings we make. We just made them blank white, and that's it. But this is not only that it is adorned with paintings and so on, with a certain narrative, but also the geometry of the ceiling is, somehow honoring the transition from the base of the building towards the sky, towards the upper, towards the above. I understand we cannot do this in every building, in every studio, in every block of flats. We can't. I understand. But for public buildings of a certain importance, perhaps we should also look upwards and reflect on what a ceiling means. I don't know about the floor here, if this is the original floor from the time of Sansovino, Jacopo, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. It seems a little bit somehow modernistic, but maybe I'm wrong. So he built it between 1537 and 1553. So for 16 years, this building was in the making. And he died 17 years after he finalized this building. Now, this is an unusual so-called detail when we talk about architecture, because if we talk about the architecture of today, we do not expect something like this to see. Impossible. But this is just one statue at the top of the Bibliotheca Marciana. The interior is an important archive there now. And yes, there were interventions, this part of the ceiling, and this was probably an open courtyard at the time when Sansovino built the building. I I have a hard time not to be forced in a way to abstain from commenting again on the importance of ornamentation in architecture. You know, strip this building of all its ornamentation, and what do you get? And the paradox is that we have countless artists who are even starving because they don't have work. And we could employ their talent and their exuberance and their dreaming and dreams, and yet we don't do it. So the artist retires in an attic and begins to paint easel paintings and probably dies unknown, a lost life, a lost destiny. And even the architect is lost, because in the absence of a collaboration with the other arts and the other artists, the work becomes at best, you know, with some interesting spaces, but that's about it. Anyway, now this is the building he built at the base of the Campanile in San Marco, and which was destroyed, and then it was rebuilt. I forgot, it was a fire or something. Logetta, I don't know if I pronounce well, Logetta del Sansovino, built between 1538 and 1546. These are some sculptures or bas relief that, they were saved, and they were included in the facades of the building after it was rebuilt. So it's here, this building, and Bibliotheca Marciana is here. And this is the Campanile. He also built a church here, and we are going to see it, which Napoleon and his, you know, graceful or less than graceful desire to assert himself in a more Napoleonic age destroyed, demolished in 1807, I think. And but this is a lost church for Venice, and it was built by Sansovino. And here is the Basilica di San Marco, where he's actually buried, Jacopo Sansovino. So this is the Logetta, or again, sorry if I didn't pronounce correctly, and some of the sculptural work belongs to Sansovino. And of course, above the Campanile. Now, the Church of San Gimignano in Venice, which was demolished in 1807, is the church I just mentioned in Piazza San Marco. This is a drawn image of the church. And from what I read, it was a perfectly fine church, aesthetically speaking. It was even described as having a very elegant facade. Now, I'm not so sure a church should have an elegant facade. Anyway, this is a question of linguistics. Canaletto painted, I don't know if this is from the painting by Canaletto, but this is how the church kind of looked like. We only have now prints and paintings of it. There were no photographs in 1807. This is, I think, the painting, yes, of Canaletto. So this building does not exist any longer. And Napoleon took over this side of Piazza San Marco, and Bibliotheca Marciana is here around the corner. So it was across the square from the Basilica di San Marco. This little church, it does not exist any longer, thanks to an ambitious emperor. By the way, this year there are 200 years since Napoleon died. He died in 1821. The very same year when Charles Baudelaire, the great French modern poet, was born, and Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian writer, one of the greatest ever. Anyway, it's interesting, given what they did here, the Venetians, you know, to bring in the memory of San Gimignano Church. by Sansovino in the form of some kind of a, you know, artistic or aesthetic ghost. I kind of like it, you know, it should have been kept like this in a way. And this is actually a possible suggestion where we have a building with a certain history, with a certain sacrifices made. You can build with tissue or with some kind of a material, just a suggestion of what once was there, and leave it there. You know, I think it's important as an homage to a past which was different from the present. I think it's possible. Let's only hope Nike or Sony or who knows what doesn't capitalize on this and transform it into a banner for publicity. Minerva, now we are going to see, and we end this presentation about Jacopo Sansovino with some sculptural works, because he was essentially and foremost a sculptor, although he built a lot, but he was trained in actually as a sculptor. Apollo. In a way, I think at that time to practice any art was not so difficult in terms of choosing the subject matter, because the subject matter was provided by mythology or by religion. You know, now we are completely free. What to paint? And then we arrive at abstract expressionism, like Jackson Pollock, and you begin to splash colors on canvas in exasperation in a way. Although Jackson Pollock, I have seen an exhibition with his studies from El Greco. And so Jackson Pollock himself started by studying the art of the past. But again, at that time, at the time of Sansovino, there were themes like Minerva, Apollo, you know, Neptune, you know, mythological figures. And, you know, he just interpreted the theme in his own way. Mercury. It must be, and it's hard for me to not to be envious a little bit of this architect and other architects like him who also practiced sculpture, who were acknowledged and revered even by you know, other artists, society, administration, and so on. It was a climate of culture, although of course money existed then too, and you know, mercantile interests were part of life, just as today. It's just that today, again, I cannot imagine an architect of his stature being also a sculptor and being hired to lead an important administration, you know, being a sculptor. Pax, meaning peace. Now, these were part of buildings, but now we look at, this was also part of the building of Loghetta. We saw it near the Campanile. He was an accomplished sculptor. Why Michelangelo despised him, I don't know. Maybe because he didn't have the tumultuousness that he had. It's true, he didn't. But there is in the sculpture of Jacopo Sansovino a sense of measure, of balance. There is nothing, you know, emphatic or rhetorical or expressionistic. And for this, I think we can admire him, a sense of balance, even of reticence, of measure. But again, because I think of the present, and I am trying to imagine an architect today who is either in a small city or a larger city or a town, whatever, where the architect contributes with his or her talent in various ways, with buildings, with sculptures, with paintings. You know, this would truly modify the spirit of that place, be it a town or a city. And I think it can be done, but we need a change in mentality, I think. As we can see, he was quite an accomplished sculptor. Maybe I'm thinking now, maybe Michelangelo was a little bit turned off, so to speak, by the decorative side of Jacopo Sansovino. It's possible, because I see it also in his sculptures. But he was, I think, not, I mean, it would be to diminish him in an illegitimate way to consider that his decorative side was, predominant. No, it wasn't, like we see clearly in this sculpture, in this statue. And I end this presentation with this wonderful wax model that he did when he was very young of the deposition of Christ for Perugino to use. So he did it, for this purpose. And I like this work very much. I don't know, is it because it is a wax model, but I find it very modern, actually, and very impressive in its dramatic, in its expressionism, is this work. I find it quite remarkable. And yes, it was done by the chief architect of Venice for many years in the 16th century. And that is Jacopo Sansovino.